The autumn sun cast a pale orange glow across the dusty landscape as John secured the last fence post on the edge of his wheat field. The air was dry, carrying the scent of harvested grain mixed with the earthiness of freshly tilled soil. His farm stood isolated from the main settlement, surrounded by fields of gray-tinged wheat that seemed to merge with the sandy horizon. Only a few chickens scratched about near the weathered wooden barn, and his aging farm equipment rested silently in the shadows. John wiped sweat from his brow, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back. At 42, he wasn't old by frontier planet standards, but years of solitary farming had weathered him. His calloused hands bore testimony to countless harvests, each one a little lonelier than the last since Maria had succumbed to the fever 3 years ago. The epidemic had taken many in the settlement, but for John, it had taken everything that mattered. The wooden windmill nearby creaked in protest against a sudden gust, its broken blades a reminder of another repair job he had postponed. It had been broken for nearly a year now, but somehow fixing it seemed less important with each passing day. What was the point of efficiency when you were just feeding one mouth? John gathered his tools and headed toward his small wooden house. Inside, everything was neat but dimly lit. He had never bothered to replace the solar panels that had stopped working last winter. The walls were adorned with simple furnishings, a table made of local wood, 2 chairs, though he only ever needed one, and a small bookshelf containing practical manuals on farming and medicine. In the corner stood a pot-bellied stove that served as both kitchen and heat source during the cold nights. As twilight descended, John prepared a simple meal of root vegetables and the last of his cured meat. He had just settled into his chair when he heard it, a soft, almost fearful knock on his door. Visitors were rare out here, especially after sundown. John instinctively reached for the hunting rifle he kept by the door, a habit born of frontier caution rather than genuine hostility. The knock came again, more hesitant this time. John approached slowly and pulled the door open just enough to peer outside. Standing on his porch was a sight he had never expected. A humanoid figure, clearly not of Earth origin, with iridescent violet-tinged skin that seemed to catch the last rays of sunset. Her eyes, large and deep amber, reflected a profound exhaustion. But what caught John's attention most were the 2 small children huddled behind her legs, their thin frames visibly shaking. Their eyes, similar to the woman's but tinged with a deeper blue, darted frantically between John and the ground. "I am not here to steal," the woman said in halting English, her voice carrying an accent that seemed to resonate oddly in the air. "I will work, any work, to feed my children." John stood frozen, his hand still gripping the rifle. Colonists were taught to be wary of alien encounters, especially after the border raids a decade ago. The settlement's policy was clear: report any alien sightings immediately to the marshal. But something in her posture, the protective way she positioned herself in front of the children, the hollowness in her cheeks, gave him pause. "Please," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They have not eaten in 2 days." John looked past her, into the gathering darkness. No one else seemed to be around. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the settlement proper even further. If this was some kind of trap, it was an elaborate one. The children's faces bore the unmistakable signs of malnutrition, sunken eyes, and pallid complexions that transcended species differences. "Come in," he finally said, stepping aside. Quickly. The woman hesitated, perhaps surprised by his response, then gently ushered the children inside. John closed the door behind them and secured the latch. "Sit," he gestured toward the table. The woman remained standing, her back straight despite her evident fatigue. "I work first," she insisted, "then eat." John shook his head. "Not how things work here. Sit. Eat. Then we'll talk about work." He moved to the stove and added more vegetables to the pot, stirring to distribute the heat. From a small cabinet, he retrieved 3 additional bowls and spoons. The woman watched his every movement, her eyes narrowing slightly when he approached with the food. "It's just soup," he explained, placing the bowls on the table. "Nothing fancy." The children looked to the woman, clearly waiting for permission. She nodded almost imperceptibly, and they scrambled onto the chairs. Their movements were awkward, as if they weren't accustomed to sitting at a proper table. "You too," John said to the woman, gesturing to the remaining chair. She shook her head. "I eat after work." John considered arguing, but recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. Pride. He understood. It was often all that remained when everything else was stripped away. "Fine, but the children eat now." The woman nodded and positioned herself behind the children, one hand resting protectively on each small shoulder. John noticed that her fingers bore unusual markings, patterns that seemed to shift slightly in the firelight. The children ate with restrained desperation, taking small, careful bites despite their obvious hunger. The older child, who appeared to be around 7, occasionally paused to ensure the younger one was managing. "What's your name?" John asked, directing his question to the woman. She hesitated, as if weighing whether such information was safe to share. "Sina," she finally replied. "I'm John." He gestured around the sparse room. "This is my farm. I live alone." Sina's eyes darted to the empty spaces of the room, perhaps noting the subtle signs of a once-shared life. The second chair, a smaller pair of boots by the door that John had never brought himself to discard. "You are not afraid?" she asked suddenly. John considered the question. "Should I be?" "Your kind usually is." John returned to his own meal. "My kind has many faults. Fear is just one of them." They sat in silence as the children finished eating. The younger one, perhaps 4 years old, had started to nod off, eyelids drooping despite evident efforts to stay alert. "There's a back room," John said, standing. "It's small, but you and the children can sleep there." Sina stiffened. "What work do you require?" "Nothing tonight," John replied. "Tomorrow, we'll figure it out. For now, rest." He showed them to the small storage room he had converted to a makeshift bedroom years ago. It contained a simple pallet bed and little else, but it was clean and warmer than the main room. "Thank you," Sina said formally, her posture still guarded. "I will not forget this debt." John shook his head. "No debt, just helping." He returned to the main room, leaving them to settle in. Through the thin walls, he could hear Sina softly speaking to the children in a melodic language he didn't recognize. Her tone was reassuring, gentle in a way her interactions with him had not been. John sat by the dying fire, contemplating what he had just done. Harboring unregistered aliens was a serious offense on frontier planets. If discovered, he could lose his land rights, face fines he couldn't possibly pay, or worse. Yet the image of those hungry children overrode all such concerns. He would deal with the consequences tomorrow. For tonight, at least 3 souls would sleep with full bellies under his roof. Dawn broke with a pale, hesitant light filtering through the small windows. John was already awake, stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast when he heard movement from the back room. Sina emerged silently, the children still asleep behind her. Without a word, she moved to the wash basin and began cleaning the bowls from the previous night's meal. Her movements were efficient, practiced. "You don't need to do that," John said. Sina continued her task. "I work, as promised." John watched her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Can you bake?" She paused, uncertainty flickering across her features. "I can learn." John showed her how to mix flour with water and salt to make simple flatbread. Sina watched intently, her amber eyes following his every movement. When it was her turn to try, her hands moved with surprising dexterity, though the dough stuck awkwardly to her fingers. "Like this," John demonstrated again, adding a touch more flour to her mixture. Their hands briefly touched, and he noticed how her skin felt oddly smooth, almost like fine-grained leather, but warmer. Sina's first attempt at flatbread was misshapen, but John nodded in approval nonetheless. Good enough. It'll taste the same. He showed her how to cook it on the hot surface of the stove. The aroma of baking bread filled the small house, and soon the children appeared, drawn by the smell. The younger one's face lit up at the sight of food, while the older child remained cautious, eyes darting between John and Sina. "Eat while it's hot," John said, sliding plates toward them. The children looked to Sina, who nodded. "Eat," she echoed. "I will make more." As they ate, John observed the family. The children's skin bore the same violet hue as Sina's, though lighter, and they shared her amber eyes. But there were differences too, subtle patterns along their forearms that didn't match hers, suggesting they might not be her biological children. "Where are you from?" John asked casually, breaking the silence. Sina's hands stilled momentarily on the dough. "Far," she replied vaguely, "beyond the trade routes." "Those children yours?" A protective shadow crossed her face. "They are mine now." John didn't press further. The frontier had taught him that family was often forged rather than born, especially in harsh circumstances. "I need help harvesting the east field today," he said instead. "Can you handle farm work?" Sina straightened, a hint of pride entering her posture. "I am strong. I can work." John nodded. "The children can stay here if they're too young to help." "They come with me," Sina said firmly. "Always." John understood. Trust was a rare commodity on the frontier, especially for those on the run, and he had no doubt that Sina and these children were running from something. After breakfast, John led them to the wheat field that stretched behind his house. The autumn breeze rustled through the golden stalks, creating waves across the landscape. He demonstrated how to use the hand sickle, showing Sina the proper angle to cut the wheat stalks near the base. "Bundle them like this," he explained, gathering a handful of cut stalks and tying them with a length of twine. "Leave them standing to dry." Sina mimicked his actions with surprising speed, her hands quickly adapting to the unfamiliar tool. The older child watched carefully, then began gathering fallen stalks, while the younger one sat at the field's edge, playing with dry leaves and occasionally looking up to ensure Sina was still nearby. They worked through the morning, John occasionally adjusting Sina's technique, but mostly leaving her to find her own rhythm. By midday, they had cleared a significant portion of the field. Sweat glistened on Sina's forehead, but she showed no signs of slowing. "Break time," John announced, retrieving a water canteen and some wrapped flatbread from his pack. Sina hesitated before accepting the water, taking only a small sip before passing it to the children. John noticed but said nothing. Trust would come slowly, if at all, as they sat in the shade of a lone tree at the field's edge. John's gaze wandered to the distant settlement. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and he could make out tiny figures moving about their daily business. "Will you report us?" Sina asked suddenly, following his gaze. John looked at her, taking in the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand instinctively moved to shield the younger child. "No," he replied simply. "Why not? Your laws require it." John shrugged. "Some laws matter more than others." Sina studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher some hidden motive. "You are unusual for a human." "Maybe," John conceded, "or maybe just lonely." They returned to work after the brief rest, falling into a rhythm that carried them through the afternoon. The children, apparently sensing the importance of the task, remained quiet and helpful in their own small ways. By sunset, they had harvested nearly half the field, work that would have taken John at least 2 days on his own. As they walked back to the house, tools slung over their shoulders, John found himself appreciating the simple companionship of shared labor. It had been years since he'd worked alongside another person, feeling the satisfying exhaustion that came with a productive day. Inside, John prepared a heartier meal than the previous night. Stew made with preserved meat and the vegetables from his small garden. This time, Sina sat at the table with the children, though she waited until they had started eating before taking her first bite. As night deepened and the children dozed by the fire, Sina remained alert, her posture still guarded despite the day's shared work. "You should rest," John said, packing his pipe with the last of his tobacco. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Sina watched as he lit the pipe, the ember glow briefly illuminating his weathered features. "I was sold to a market planet when I was 15, she said suddenly, her voice low to avoid waking the children. "I worked there until I escaped last year." John kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he winced. The market planets were notorious throughout the galaxy, lawless trading hubs where labor contracts often disguised what amounted to slavery. "These children," Sina continued, glancing at their sleeping forms, "belonged to a street family. Their mother died in a military sweep." Her voice caught slightly. "I found them hiding in a waste disposal unit. I could not leave them." "You did right," John said quietly. Sina's eyes met his, searching. "Did I? I have brought them to a planet where they are unwelcome, where we must hide and beg for work. They're alive," John pointed out. "Fed. Safe. At least for now. That's not nothing." Sina fell silent, absorbing his words. After a moment, she spoke again. "Why do you help us? What do you gain?" John considered the question, puffing thoughtfully on his pipe. "Not everything is about gain, Sina. In my experience, it always is." John couldn't argue with that. Her experience likely outweighed any platitudes he might offer. "Then, let's say I gain help with the harvest. A fair exchange." This seemed to satisfy her somewhat. Practicality was a language they both understood. As the night deepened, John showed Sina how to bank the fire to keep it burning slowly through the night. She watched his movements with careful attention, asking occasional questions about the farm's operations. Her quick intelligence was evident in how rapidly she absorbed new information. "Tomorrow I need to go to the settlement for supplies," John mentioned as they prepared to retire for the night. "You and the children should stay here." Sina's expression tightened. "Is it safe?" "Safer than coming with me," John assured her. "No one comes out this way without reason, and I won't be gone long." Sina nodded reluctantly. "We will continue the harvest while you are gone." John was struck by her determination to earn her keep, even in his absence. "Don't overwork yourself. Rest if you need to." "We will be fine," she said with quiet dignity. The following morning, John left for the settlement just after dawn, riding his aging electric cart along the dusty road. The journey took nearly an hour, the cart's battery struggling with the uneven terrain. The settlement itself was a modest collection of prefabricated buildings and locally constructed wooden structures, housing perhaps 200 colonists. John headed straight for the general store, keeping his interactions brief and businesslike. He loaded his cart with flour, salt, preserved goods, and a few tools he needed for repairs. As he was securing his purchases, he noticed two older men watching him from the porch of the community hall. "Heard you've been busy out at your place. John," one of them called out. Merrick, the settlement's miller, a man with perpetually flour-dusted overalls and a shrewd gaze. "Always work to be done," John replied neutrally. "Alone, are you?" the second man asked. Thomas, a council member known for his conservative views regarding settlement security. John met his gaze steadily. "Always am." "Funny thing," Merrick continued. "Saw lights moving in your fields last night. Late. Thought you might have company." John secured the last of his supplies. "Just me and my lantern, checking the irrigation channels. Worried about flooding if the autumn rains come early." The men exchanged glances, clearly unconvinced. "Council's been talking about increasing patrols along the outer farms," Thomas mentioned casually. After what happened to the Wilsons' place last spring. John nodded, remembering the incident. A storage shed broken into, some supplies stolen. It had been blamed on aliens, though no evidence had ever materialized. "Appreciate the concern," John said, climbing into his cart. "But I can handle my own security." As he drove away, he could feel their eyes following him. The settlement was small. Gossip traveled fast. If they suspected he was harboring aliens, it wouldn't take long for word to reach the marshal. When John returned to the farm, he found Sina and the children exactly where he'd left them, in the wheat field, methodically harvesting. They had made impressive progress, clearing at least another quarter of the field. Sina straightened when she saw him, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "Any problems?" she asked immediately. "Nothing serious," John replied, unloading supplies from the cart. "But people are noticing things. We'll need to be more careful." That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, John and Sina sat at the table reviewing the day's work. John spread out a rough map of his farm, showing Sina the remaining fields that needed harvesting. "If we maintain this pace, we could finish before the first frost," he explained. "But I'm more concerned about you three. You can't stay hidden forever." Sina traced a finger along the map's edge. "We will move on once the harvest is complete. That was our agreement." John frowned. "And go where?" "The nearest spaceport is 5 days' journey, and they check documentation thoroughly." "There are ways," Sina said vaguely. "Places between places where people like us can travel." John didn't press for details. The less he knew about underground alien networks, the better, both for his legal standing and for her safety. "At least stay until after the autumn rains," he suggested. "The roads become nearly impassable, and the children shouldn't travel in those conditions." Sina studied him, perhaps searching for hidden motives. "Why would you want us to stay longer?" John hadn't fully examined his own reasons. The company, certainly. The farm felt less empty with others around. But there was something else too. A sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Maria's death. "Winter preparations are difficult alone," he said instead, a practical truth that obscured the deeper one. Sina seemed to accept this explanation. "We will stay until the roads clear after the rains. Then we must go." John nodded, satisfied with this compromise. "Tomorrow we should repair the north fence. I've seen wild dog packs circling closer lately." As they settled into their planning, a quiet comfort grew between them. The simple understanding of two people aligned in common purpose, if only temporarily. Later that night, John was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. He bolted upright, reaching instinctively for his rifle. In the main room, he found Sina already awake. The children huddled behind her. A rock lay on the floor amid shattered window glass. "Stay here," John whispered, moving cautiously to the broken window. Outside, he could make out shadowy figures retreating toward the road. 3 men, one with a distinctive red bandana around his neck. "Humans?" Sina asked quietly. John nodded grimly. "From the settlement, most likely. News travels fast." "We should leave," Sina said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Now." "No," John replied firmly. "That's exactly what they want. We'll stay. Fix the window in the morning. I know who they are, troublemakers, but not killers." Sina didn't appear convinced, but she nodded slowly. "The children sleep in the back room tonight. I will watch." John didn't argue. He understood the instinct to guard what was precious. "I'll take first watch. You rest. I'll wake you in a few hours." The rest of the night passed without further incident. But the broken window had shattered more than glass. The relative peace of the past few days had been an illusion, and reality had now intruded with jagged edges. Morning brought a tense quiet. John repaired the window, while Sina kept the children occupied with small tasks inside. As he worked, John noticed unfamiliar figures observing the farm from the distant road. Colonists who normally had no business this far out, their curiosity now piqued by rumors. "The rumor is that you're harboring aliens planning to take over farmland," John explained to Sina later, as they worked together to reinforce the back door. "Ridiculous. But fear doesn't need logic." Sina's hands stilled on the wooden beam. "This is how it begins," she said quietly. "First suspicion, then fear, then violence. I have seen this pattern before." John couldn't deny the progression. "We'll be careful. Keep the children inside for now. I'll speak with the marshal. Try to calm things down." "No officials," Sina said sharply. "They would take us." "The marshal is a reasonable man," John argued. "He might—" "No," Sina interrupted. "Promise me, no officials." John reluctantly agreed, recognizing the desperation in her voice. Whatever she had experienced had taught her to trust no one with authority, regardless of John's assurances. The following days settled into an uneasy routine. They continued harvesting, but kept closer to the house. John took to carrying his rifle whenever he worked the outer fields. Sina remained hyper-vigilant, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for approaching strangers. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, a deeper connection began to form between John and Sina. Their conversations, once limited to work-related topics, gradually expanded. John found himself telling her about Maria, about the life they had planned together before the fever took her. Sina listened without judgment, occasionally offering insights that suggested she understood loss intimately. In turn, she began to share more of her own past, fragmented stories of her homeworld, a place of vast forests and intricate social structures, now disrupted by interstellar conflicts. She spoke of her captivity on the market planet, the humiliations and hardships she had endured, and her eventual escape. "I was nothing there," she confessed one evening, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Less than nothing, a tool to be used and discarded." "You survived," John said. "That takes strength few possess." Sina glanced at the sleeping children. "I survived for them now. They deserve more than a life of running and hiding." "Everyone deserves that," John agreed. The weather began to change as they finished harvesting the last field. The air grew damper, heavy with the promise of the autumn rains. John worked frantically to repair the roof and reinforce the barn doors, knowing that once the rains came, outdoor work would become nearly impossible. Sina proved invaluable during these preparations. Her strength exceeded John's expectations, and her quick mind often found efficient solutions to problems that had stumped him. The children, too, had begun to help in small ways, the older one learning to sort and store grains, the younger one keeping the chickens fed and contained. They had just completed storing the last of the harvest when the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and ominous. They rolled across the plains with surprising speed, bringing with them gusting winds that bent the few trees surrounding the farm. "Bad timing," John muttered, securing the last of the storage containers. "I haven't finished the drainage channels around the south field." The rain began as a light patter, but quickly intensified into a torrential downpour. John and Sina watched from the porch as water began to accumulate in the low-lying areas, forming expanding pools that threatened to flood the newly planted winter crops. "The field will flood," Sina observed, concern evident in her voice. John nodded grimly. "If the water rises any higher, we'll lose everything I just planted." Without hesitation, Sina stepped into the rain. "Show me what to do!" Despite John's protests about the dangerous conditions, they both donned waterproof gear and headed to the south field. The rain lashed at them mercilessly, reducing visibility to mere feet. John showed Sina how to dig diversion channels, creating pathways to direct water away from the vulnerable seedlings. They worked frantically, the mud clinging to their boots and making each step a struggle. The wind howled around them, driving the rain sideways into their faces. Despite the protective clothing, They were soon soaked to the skin. John's foot slipped as he attempted to deepen a channel, sending him sprawling into the mud. The fall knocked the wind from his lungs, and for a moment he lay there, feeling the rain pound against his back. Exhaustion washed over him, not just from the day's work, but from years of struggling alone against the elements, against grief, against the relentless demands of survival. Then Sina was there, her strong hands gripping his shoulders, pulling him upright. "Don't give up!" she shouted over the storm's roar, her face streaked with mud and rain. "We can save it!" Something in her determination rekindled John's resolve. Together, they continued their battle against the rising water, digging deeper channels, reinforcing earthen berms, working with the synchronized efficiency of partners who instinctively understood each other's movements. As the storm reached its peak, Sina suddenly disappeared from John's side. Panic surged through him as he called her name, his voice lost in the howling wind. He searched frantically, splashing through knee-deep water, until he spotted her running toward the storage shed. She emerged moments later, carrying tools and sacks. With remarkable ingenuity, she began using the sacks filled with soil to create a more substantial barrier against the encroaching water. John quickly adopted her technique, and together they constructed a makeshift dam that gradually began to divert the flood away from the field's center. Hours passed in this desperate struggle. Their world narrowed to the immediate task of moving earth and water. The children watched anxiously from the house window, their small faces pressed against the glass, witnesses to a battle against nature itself. Finally, as darkness fell and the storm began to abate, John and Sina stood exhausted at the field's edge, surveying their work. The drainage channels had held. Though parts of the field were submerged, the majority of the seedlings remained safely above water. "We did it," John said, his voice hoarse with fatigue. Sina nodded, her shoulders slumping as the adrenaline ebbed. Blood trickled from a cut on her hand where she had grasped a sharp stone, and her clothing was torn and caked with mud. "Thank you," John said simply, the words inadequate for what he felt. Sina met his gaze, a new understanding passing between them. "This is your home," she said. "I could not let it be destroyed." They made their way back to the house, leaning on each other for support. The children rushed to meet them, their relief palpable as they embraced Sina, unconcerned with her muddy state. That night, after washing away the mud and changing into dry clothes, they sat close to the fire, a different kind of silence enveloping them, no longer the wary quiet of strangers, but the comfortable stillness of those who have faced adversity together and emerged stronger. "When I was captured," Sina said suddenly, her voice soft in the firelit room, "I vowed never to call any place home again. Home meant vulnerability, attachment, things I could not afford." John listened, sensing she needed to speak these thoughts aloud. "But today," she continued, "when I saw the water threatening to destroy what you had built, what we had worked for," she paused, seemingly surprised by her own words, "I realized I had broken that vow without noticing." John reached out hesitantly, his hand coming to rest on hers. She didn't pull away. "Home isn't always a place," he said. "Sometimes it's the people you'd fight a storm for." Sina's fingers curled slightly around his, an acknowledgement of a truth neither had fully recognized until that moment. Dawn revealed the storm's aftermath. Fields glistened with standing water, and debris littered the yard. But as John had hoped, the damage was manageable, nothing compared to what it might have been without their intervention. As they began the cleanup process, John noticed movement on the road. A group of people from the settlement approached, led by Merrick, the miller. John tensed, reaching instinctively for his rifle. "Stay in the house," he told Sina, who had already positioned herself protectively near the children. "John," she said warningly, "if they have come to take us." "They haven't," John replied, though he couldn't be certain. Just stay inside, please." He walked out to meet the approaching group, rifle held loosely but visibly at his side. To his surprise, Merrick raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "We saw the flooding from town," the miller called out. "Came to help with cleanup." John studied the group skeptically. Besides Merrick, there were 5 others, including Thomas from the council. They carried shovels, ropes, and other tools, implements for assistance, not aggression. "Why the sudden neighborliness?" John asked, not lowering his guard. Thomas stepped forward, discomfort evident in his stance. "We saw you two fighting the flood last night, from the ridge." He gestured vaguely toward the elevated land that separated John's farm from the settlement. "Didn't look like any invasion to me. Looked like 2 people saving a farm." John remained silent, waiting. "Look," Merrick continued, "rumors got out of hand. But what we saw—" He shook his head. "Anyone who works that hard to save land, that's not someone looking to take it. That's someone who cares for it." From the corner of his eye, John saw Sina emerge from the house, standing tall on the porch despite the obvious tension in her posture. The children remained inside, peering through the window. "We brought some dry blankets," a woman in the group offered, holding up a bundle. "And bread. Figured you might need it after that storm." John felt something shift inside him, a cautious hope that perhaps understanding could grow where fear had taken root. "We could use the help," he admitted finally, lowering his rifle. "The south fence was damaged, and there's debris in the irrigation channels." The group dispersed across the farm, tackling various cleanup tasks with the efficiency of frontier people accustomed to disaster recovery. John noticed how they initially kept their distance from Sina, but gradually, as the work progressed, the space between them narrowed. By midday, Merrick was showing Sina how to properly secure fence posts against flooding, their heads bent together over the task. The woman who had brought blankets, Ellen, the settlement's weaver, had coaxed the children outside and was teaching them how to make simple baskets from the reeds that grew along the irrigation channels. John watched these interactions with quiet amazement. Change, when it came, was rarely dramatic. More often it arrived in small moments of shared purpose, in the mundane miracle of people working side by side, despite their differences. As the sun began its descent, the cleanup nearing completion, Merrick approached John where he was repairing a chicken coop. "Council's meeting tomorrow," the miller said, leaning against a post. "To discuss the situation here." John stiffened. "What situation is that?" Merrick's weathered face crinkled in a half-smile. "The situation of having new neighbors we didn't properly welcome," he sobered. "There will be those who still object. Change comes hard to some. But after today—" He glanced toward Sina, who was helping Ellen pack up her weaving materials. "Well, let's just say opinions are shifting." "She saved this farm," John said simply. "Worked harder than anyone I've ever seen." Merrick nodded. "Saw that for myself." He hesitated. "Bring her to the market day this weekend. Let people meet her properly. Might help smooth things further." After the settlement group departed, John relayed the invitation to Sina. She received it with understandable skepticism. "It could be a trap," she pointed out. "A way to expose us publicly." "It could be," John agreed. "Or it could be the beginning of acceptance." Sina glanced at the children, who were proudly displaying the small, lopsided baskets they had made under Ellen's guidance. "They deserve a chance at normalcy," she said softly. "But I have learned that hope is expensive. The price is often disappointment." "Sometimes it's worth the cost," John replied. The market day dawned clear and cool, the recent storms having washed the air clean. John hitched his cart, noticing how Sina fussed over the children's appearance, smoothing their hair, adjusting their borrowed clothes. Her own nervousness was evident in the way she repeatedly checked the small knife concealed in her boot, a precaution John pretended not to notice. The settlement's central square had been transformed into a bustling marketplace. Tables displayed local produce, handcrafted goods, and the occasional luxury item brought in by traveling merchants. People moved between stalls, bartering and socializing in equal measure. A hush fell over the nearest section as John's cart entered the square. Sina and the children seated beside him. Eyes turned their way. Conversations paused. John felt Sina tense beside him, her hand moving instinctively toward her concealed weapon. Then, Merrick stepped forward from his flower stall. "John!" he called out jovially, too loudly. "Brought the whole family today. I see." The deliberate choice of words, family, was not lost on anyone present. It was Merrick's way of signaling his position, of extending legitimacy. John helped Sina and the children down from the cart, acutely aware of the scrutiny they faced. The older child pressed against Sina's side, while the younger one, surprisingly, waved at Ellen, who smiled and waved back from her fabric stall. "Thought you might want some proper flour," Merrick said, approaching with a package. "After all that work, saving your crops." Sina stood straight, her dignity evident despite her obvious discomfort. "Thank you," she said formally. The field needed saving. That it did, Merrick agreed. He turned to address those still watching. "This is Sina. She's the one who figured out how to divert the flood from John's south field during the worst of the storm." There were murmurs from the crowd, some appreciative, others still uncertain. John noticed Thomas standing with the council members, his expression conflicted. A young woman approached, carrying a small child of her own. "My husband's farm flooded 3 years ago," she said directly to Sina. "We lost everything. Had to start over." She adjusted her child on her hip. "Anyone who fights that hard to save land understands what it means to belong to it." Others began to approach, some merely curious, others offering cautious welcomes. The children gradually relaxed, especially when offered sweet preserved fruits by an elderly couple who ran the orchard beyond the settlement's eastern edge. Not everyone was welcoming. John noticed several colonists deliberately turning away, their disapproval evident. Among them were the 3 men who had thrown the rock through his window, now standing at the edge of the square, red bandanas around their necks, watching with evident hostility. But they were the minority now. The tide had shifted, not completely, but enough to create a space where Sina and the children could stand in the open without fear. A small miracle in itself. As the day progressed, John observed Sina gradually lowering her guard. She began asking questions about the settlement's agriculture, offering insights from her own world's farming techniques. The children ventured further from her side, drawn into games with local children who had overcome their initial wariness. By late afternoon, when they prepared to return to the farm, Merrick approached with a formal package. "Council voted," he said without preamble. 4-1 in favor. He handed the package to John. "It's provisional registration for your guests. Not full citizenship, but enough to prevent any official trouble. They can stay, at least until the spring council review." John accepted the package with genuine surprise. Such registrations were rarely granted, especially so quickly. "Thank you," he said, knowing the miller must have advocated strongly. Merrick shrugged. "Frontier needs good workers, people who care about the land." He glanced at Sina, who was helping the children into the cart. "Just keep to yourselves for a while longer. Let things settle. Change takes time." That evening, after the children had gone to bed, John and Sina sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. The provisional registration papers lay on the small table between them, their significance far greater than the simple sheets would suggest. "It's just paper," Sina said, her finger tracing the official seal. "It can be revoked as easily as it was granted." "True," John acknowledged, "but it's a beginning." Sina's gaze remained on the distant stars. "I have never had official recognition before, on any world. She looked down at her hands. I have always been invisible. Or worse, visible only as something to be used. John understood that for Sina, the registration represented more than legal status. It was acknowledgement of her personhood, her right to exist openly. I've been thinking, he said carefully. The North Parcel. It's good land, but I've never had the time or energy to work it properly. With the right irrigation, it could support another small house, maybe a greenhouse. Sina turned to him, her expression guarded yet hopeful. What are you suggesting? John reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. A land deed he had requested from the settlement's record keeper earlier that day. Half of this farm is yours, he said simply, if you want it. Sina stared at the deed, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted it. Why would you do this? John considered his answer carefully. Because you fought for this land as if it were your own. Because the children deserve roots somewhere. Because... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't overwhelm or pressure her. Because I've been alone a long time, and I'm tired of it. Tears gathered in Sina's eyes, the first John had seen since her arrival. One slipped down her cheek, catching the starlight. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, John assured her. It's yours regardless. No obligations attached. Sina carefully folded the deed and held it against her heart. Thank you, she said finally, for seeing me as worthy. You always were, John replied softly. Some of us just needed our eyes opened. The months that followed brought gradual but steady changes. With Merrick's help, John secured building materials for a small addition to the house, proper bedrooms for Sina and the children. The older child, whose name John learned was Tali, began accompanying Merrick to the mill once a week, learning the intricacies of grinding grain. The younger one, Nev, showed a surprising talent for working with the chickens, who seemed unperturbed by his alien features. Sina herself flourished with the security of legal status and land ownership. She adapted John's farming techniques, blending them with methods from her homeworld. Under her care, the North Parcel, her parcel, began to produce unfamiliar but nutritious vegetables that soon found eager buyers at the settlement market. Not everything was smooth. The men with red bandanas still glared when they encountered Sina in the settlement. Occasional travelers reacted with surprise or suspicion to the unusual family at the isolated farm. The marshal, while honoring the council's decision, maintained a watchful eye on their activities. But these challenges seemed manageable now, mere ripples in the steady current of their daily life. The provisional registration became permanent at the spring council review, with even Thomas voting in favor after Sina's innovative irrigation system helped several farms survive an unexpected dry spell. One evening, as winter gave way to early spring, John and Sina sat on the porch of the expanded house, watching Tali and Nev chase fireflies in the yard. The new structure they had built together stood nearby, a combination greenhouse and storage building that bridged their separate parcels of land. A physical manifestation of their partnership. I remember that first night, Sina said, her voice soft with reminiscence. Standing at your door, certain you would turn us away, or worse. John nodded. I almost did. Fear is a powerful thing. As is kindness, Sina replied. She reached over, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. You asked nothing of me except honest work. You gave us food, shelter, dignity. Her voice caught slightly. Home. John's fingers intertwined with hers. You gave as much as you received. More. Probably. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children's joyful play. Nev's laughter rang out as he captured a firefly, his face illuminated by its gentle glow, before he released it back into the gathering darkness. I came to your door saying I would work your fields to feed my children, Sina said thoughtfully. I never imagined we would end up working our fields to feed our children. John squeezed her hand gently. Life has a way of offering more than we ask for. Sometimes. And sometimes, Sina replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. Exactly what we need. As night settled fully around them, the stars emerged above the fields they had saved together, fields that would feed them through another year, and perhaps many more to come, fields that had transformed from mere land into something far more precious, home, in every sense of the word. The children eventually tired of their game and came to sit at their feet. John looked at the four of them, this unlikely family brought together by desperation, but bound now by choice, and felt a completeness he had thought lost forever. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to build the life they were creating together. But for now, this moment was enough, the quiet certainty that none of them was alone anymore.